contribution will be by Radosława Mackiewicz. To skrzywanek Poland.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mackiewicz Radosław. I'm a manager in translation agency Skrivanek Poland, and I'll tell you about practical aspects of project management and quality assurance for medical translations. That's okay. Okay, and first I will start from the main characteristic of medical text and quality assurance goals. And I will tell you in a few words what is the purpose of medical translations. And as you can see on the slide, the first key aspect is specialist vocabulary. Medical text contains specialist vocabulary appropriate for specific medical field, and in accordance to translator, the main task is to translate key vocabulary to maintain the required connotation of the translation. In this part, you have to know that the source document author and the translation recipient are specialists. Source texts are written by doctors, medical equipment specialists, and other people with specific knowledge in the medical field. And these kind of people are recipients of the translation. From the project manager point of view, so the person which is working with that kind of project, it is essential to choose methods and actions to secure the success of the translation process, which means that the translation must be suitable for its recipient. And also, of course, the specialist vocabulary have to be also translated to keep the professional connotation of the translation. As I said before, the purpose of the translations, first of all, medical translation must be a reliable source of information for professionals. Because those people are deciding on their basis about such things like you can see in here. You've got the examples like disease diagnosis, further medical treatment, medicines and methods of medical treatment, also purchase of medical equipment, or even on that kind of field like granting compensation for insurance purposes. From my point of view, so the person who is managing that kind of project, as it was before, it is essential to choose method and actions to ensure that the professional recipient of the translation is able to take that optimal decision or action to suit the medical treatment of the patient. Now I'll tell you about our management policy in accordance to the medical translations. And here you can see the main rule. Can I get the last one? Sorry. And the main rule is like a famous Latin parami, primum non nocere, which means first do no harm. And why this rule is so important? As you can see on the slide, because translations must be precise and comply with the facts. That's one of the most important goals to achieve in the translation. And any mistake could influence the decision taken by the professionals and thus may harm the patient. So we are encouraging our translators to do such actions as you can see on the slide. For example, all illegible parts of the source document have to be marked. The translator should not interpret or guess what is written in legible text fragments. Also, any doubts has to be marked and commented. Any source used for additional information by the translator also has to be marked and commented. And we think this is a very good practice. It's the same like obligations of sworn translators who are legally obliged to do so in translations of other texts, also non-medical texts. And as I said, we believe this is a good practice. And from the project manager point of view, the project manager who is working on that kind of project maintains communication between the client and the translator. He's clarifying any queries related to the issue of the life described. And he is also ensuring that any doubt is commented, any accuracy is clearly listed and commented as well. And here we have an example. Yes, that's the last one. Yes. And here we have examples of handwriting. As we can see, I'm not sure it's possible to read, for example, medicines that this patient is supposed to take. This text is hardly possible to translate. And that's why this is very important to mark any doubt, to add comments in the translation. And because, as I said before, purpose of the translation is to be a reliable source of information for the profession. Another important rule is that we are trying to support the translator during the translation process. As you can see, as much support for the translation as possible. This means that there are many ways to help translator during the translation process. And for example, we are providing reference documents and previous translations of the, for example, patient's medical history. In my experience, very often clients already have translated that kind of documents, and this is a good help for the translator, and it's improving translation process. Also, we are very often consulting the client when we have such documents like you saw on the last slide. Patients already know, people already know what kind of medicines they are taking, and they are very often able to help the translator and read what is written in the handwriting parts of the document. And also, when it's possible, not always it is possible, we are obtaining the proper information from the original author of the document. So as I said before, these are mostly doctors of medicine, and if it's possible, we are trying to reach them and consult about what is written in the handwriting parts, for example. As you can see, from project manager point of view, project manager maintains communication between the client and translator. I think it's the button. I think I'll handle without the microphone. And as I said, from the project manager point of view, very important is communication between client and the translator, and we are responsible for that part of the translation process. What else is very important? Very important is selection of a suitable vendor in accordance with the subject of the text. And the best possible solution is to ensure that a doctor of medicine translates the text. It is okay.
No,
No, it's not.
there was green light on, so I
How is
saw.
Unfortunately, the availability of that kind of translator is very low, and this significantly extends the deadlines of the projects, and clients have to wait, and very often we don't have so much time to fulfill the translation. So another solution for to make the translation faster is independent review of the translation by a translator, doctor of medicine. And this is giving the certainty that all the information in the translation has been confirmed by a medical professional. In accordance to sworn translations of medical text, the best practice is to use a sworn translator to certify the translation made by a doctor of medicine. Also, when the client needs the text translated text more urgently, we are offering our team of dedicated translators. These people are experienced with medical translation issues. They are pre-booked for a specific job. If still we are not unable to fulfill a translation within the requested time, we are offering a new deadline for completing the translation. And project manager is coordinating all those processes. He presents the options to the client, confirms the final terms of the order, and coordinates all the process. Now I'll tell you something about our processes that we are using.
The sound should be within 5 minutes, sorry.
Okay. Now I'll tell you about selection of quality processes and try to give you some examples. The processes, in accordance of course with medical translation that we are offering to the clients, are listed on the top of the slide. And this is translation by a translator selected to suit the topic of the text, preparation of glossary of terms, native speaker proofreading, independent review, and also the process called in-house check or internal quality control. And depending on the purpose of the text of the translation, we select the most suitable combination of these processes. Now, if you will tell you what is behind those processes. First is glossary of terms. In general, this is a summary of the most important vocabulary from the source text with their wording in the target language. You can see this very simplified example in the table of the slide. In the column 1 is word from source text and its wording, the second column in English language, for example. Another process is native speaker proofreading. In this case, an experienced native user of the target language ensures the correct spelling, grammar, and professional usage of the language. Other processes which I was already speaking about, independent review. In this case, an independent translator reviews and compares the translation with the source text, and is making the concerns or other issues and preparing the final version of the translation. And the last process is in-house check. In our experience, this process is quite important because this is a standard process for our written translations that we provide as Webstreaming. And this involves such actions like check numerical values, names, contact details, people's names, and proper use of terminology from the glossary. There is a dedicated department in our company which is doing which is fulfilling just this process. How important it might be, you can also see on this example. This is an example of using the decimal point in numerical values. The base value is 1.23, and if you use an incorrect decimal point in English or Polish, value by, for example, Polish native language user, in case of using an incorrect decimal point, it will be 123,000, but it's supposed to be 1.23. So the difference is huge and it might have significant impact of the meaning of the numerical values. And that's also a great example when this is important. In accordance to numerical test results, we can see there's plenty of numerical values and any mistake in that values might have fatal consequences. Now I'll give a quick detail about what is the best, in our, of course, experience, process selection in accordance to the medical translation. And the translation of medical text like patient history, hospital discharge summaries, or test results. In our opinion, the ideal selection of processes is translation by a translator to the topic of the text, independent review, and of course in-house check, as I said, is a part of. Excuse me. As I said before, is a part of all written translations, these processes, and in our company. As you also can see, we not often we don't not add the independent review as a process when the translation is urgent, because there's no time to do this. When the translation is prepared by a translator, doctor of medicine, or when the client don't require it. Another kind of text and process selection in accordance to them is our product catalogs, equipment manuals, or text to be published on a website. These texts are intended for a wider audience, and we think the best possible process selection is translation, as it was before, by a translator selected to the topic of the text, preparation of glossary of terms, native speaker proofreading, independent review, and in-house check as well, of course. And from the project manager's point of view, that is the person who is responsible for selecting processes, also in accordance with the quality assurance procedures and the goals that I said before about the purpose of the translation and text. So, now a few words about the tools that we are using to assure the quality. For sure, they are very well known CAT tools, which means computer-aided translations. We believe they have some advantages and some disadvantages. The main advantages are, as you can see, possibility of creating translation memory. This may improve translation process. Also, even now, the possibility of adding reference materials or documents to the program, and automatic translation of numerical values. How important it is, I already said, in accordance to medical test results and the decimal point in English and Polish language. Disadvantages: not every text should be translated via CAT. Any text imported into CAT tool has to be fully editable, so sometimes the image processing is also necessary to be done. Moreover, not every translator is able to work using CAT tools, and every text translated via CAT has to be also read after its completion. Here also we have some other tools which our in-house check department is using. As you can see, some of those programs, I have to say, they are part of Microsoft Word, so it's quite common tool. It's also important to know how to use the tools that we are working with every day. And project manager is coordinating these works, he plans deadlines for all portal hardware processes, choose appropriate vendors, and of course, if he's taking an action, that should the quality goes. At the end, I will tell you about also the processing large projects by managing the translation team. We create a translation team when we need to manage very large translations, and then the project manager plans the whole translation process. He provides reference documents for the translators, he manages the creation of the glossary of terms. He ensures that translations are done via CAT tools. He manages the communication process within the team. communicates with the client during the translation process, and finally checks the translation for consistency and delivery to client. And this is the last slide, I think also very important because especially in medical text, safety of information and sensitive data is very important. In Scrivanic we are following the ISO policy, ISO standards, recently is ISO 27001 standard, and it defines the basic methods relating to maintaining the safety of information. And also, as you can see, I didn't use any document of our client in this presentation. All those documents are post-scriptified on the internet. Thank you very much.
And now it's time for questions. Any questions concerning translation?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I just wonder how much time, I mean, the percentages you use on quality check, because you mentioned it after you have everything done, you have the quality issue. How much time you allow to that, depending on the task, of course.
It's also depending on the time what you have to fulfill the project, but I would say it's about 25%. But very important is the first stage of the managing the project. If we choose the proper translator suited to the topic of the text, then I think this is the halfway to succeed.
Okay. So I hope this question won't be cumbersome and pertinent, I believe. I wonder because concerning the proofreading by an experienced native language user and the independent review, if you find it convenient to ask, by an experienced native language user, you mean a person with language background or with specialized in a certain discipline, or if it were a native language user specialized in a certain discipline, then would it be possible to eliminate the independent review? Because I believe the independent review is done by an experienced translator, by experienced in the field, or just with a huge background. If you find it convenient addressing this question, right? Because in the States, as it is believed, in European Union, I think it was like this, but now it's been changing. It is believed that the translation from Polish into American English, let's say, in the US, would be better done by a native speaker of American English with a good knowledge of a Polish language, right? People will disagree perhaps with this, me too as well, but experienced native speaker specialized in the field and independent reviewer specialized in the field, how do you find it?
The independent reviewer is specialist, so he has to know the field. As we speak about the native speaker proofreader, as I said, he is checking the grammar, style, and in the text which is already translated by a specialist. So his function is different, and his role is just to keep the grammar, as I said, and style of the document. If it's understandable, for example, if it's good to use in his own style.
Okay, but I think I believe you, and I believe you know that an experienced native language user who is not a specialist in the medical field may sometimes change the translation into being more beautiful from a linguistic point of view, but less perfect from a technical point of view. And this is the reasoning behind my question.
I see. Okay, that's why I said when I was talking about the process selection,
Right.
about the documents, and I show you the processes which we are offering to fulfill the project. And we are offering just native speaker. We are offering native speaker for free only then when the text is to be published to the wider audience.
Okay.
So it has to be published on the website. It has to be product catalog.
Right.
And as you said, this native speaker, he can't change the specialized terminology. His role is to check the grammar style. So he's just a linguist. He's not a specializing in the subject.
I was just asking because your translation agency is one of the most experienced ones on the market, and that just okay.
Any other questions?
Anna Kotarska. I'd like to, actually I expected to hear some about norms in your presentation, and you just mentioned generally the processes involved in the process of translation. Could you remind me what is the newest norm Scrivanek is certified?
I'm sorry, the newest
You
one.
mentioned, I think the norm 15,038 was mentioned. Are you certified with the newest one, 17,010?
That's the ISO 27001, and it's about scientific information.
But it's not exactly the same. I know it is very important in medical translation, and not only in this type of translation, but as you are the representative leader of the branch, I would expect some comment on the newest norm. Not yet.
No, not yet, because we are following this norm. We used to have an audit through the ISO, of course, and at this point we are doing it. So if it will be changed, then maybe I will be able to say something about it.
Yes, I'm sure when you are certified, you will spread the word.
Very pragmatic question. Do you price translations differently depending on how many people have to work on a particular text?
And you're asking about the translators, yes?
Yeah. If you have a text which requires a big number of translators, reviewers, native speakers, would the price be different than for a text in which you need a smaller group of people?
It is different.
Clients know that before.
Yes, of course, client knowledge before we will start and actually the project. And we are creating the team of translators when the project is large and the time is when we don't have much time to fulfill the translation by one person. So then it's necessary, and of course it's more expensive than the
Pricing is flexible.
yes, in the space.
Any other questions?
Just for clarification, I learned from your communication that you are working for professionals, documents for professionals, other medical doctors and so on. And therefore, this must completely be correct. It's quite the opposite of another way what we learned 2 hours ago about this, what was it, patient-centered translation. That's another case. So you are an enterprise and you must fulfill your job. And this I want just to make clear. This is another thing. Thank you very much again. So we learned a lot how it is going on in the professional world. And we must know this, what is going on, we as trainers. Because our students afterwards have to earn their living in the professional world and not in other stuff.
Any comment to this question?
I think the
But I don't suppose the mic is working.
It's working.
So time is over. Thank you a lot. And the second presenter will be Gdański.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Arkadiusz Badziński and I come from University of Silesia, Poland. Today I have come to deliver the lecture on a little bit different notion, namely medical simultaneous interpreting. I hope you will find it interesting and enjoyable as well. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I'd like to thank the established guests that I had the pleasure to hear the lectures from. When I was a student myself, I had the pleasure to learn from their manuscripts. Now, they are with us. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the moderator, and I'd like to thank the audience for listening. I hope you will enjoy it. So, first of all, I'd like to talk about challenging issues in medical simultaneous interpreting from the perspective of the interpreter and the medical health science specialist, which is going to be both self-observation and retrospection simultaneously. It is well known that journals with the highest impact factor, the highest being New England Journal of Medicine, Nature, Lancet, JAMA, and Circulation, with the impact factors provided in here, expect next to the ultra-modern, ultra-correct content and excellent English version, the version which is obviously not word-for-word translation and interpreting. This is obviously applicable to written translation, but yet the same might be converted to simultaneous mode. Therefore, the aim of today's presentation is as follows: to indicate the most crucial challenging items related to medical simultaneous interpreting, these being, first of all, lexical precision, then notion of discourse, medical synonyms, British and American English, abbreviations, and finally, last but not least, the notion of full equivalence as such in the context of medical eponyms and items related to law and pharmacy as such. Therefore, the approach that was adopted for the purpose of today's presentation is as follows. That is going to be self-observation and retrospection from the following perspective. From the perspective of the medical and health science specialist, and from an English studies graduate and sworn interpreter with a 12-year experience, being myself. I feel a little bit different in here because mostly speakers that deliver the speech for today are from linguistic aspect. I did my master in linguistics at the Department of Philology, but I did my PhD in medical sciences. So I'm trying to bridge the gap, and I hope I'll make it, and you find it interesting as such. We would like to start with medical simultaneous interpreting, which is dated, or which dates to 1927, and is defined as the category or subset of public service interpreting, which is the oral translation of the oral discourse as such, with the setting in a booth in which the interpreter listens, hears, and provides the subject matter simultaneously, providing the audience with the target language rendition. Of course, obviously, simultaneous mode is currently delivered at international conferences, symposia, and meetings as such. Here there is a question: why are there so few medical interpreters? Not talking about translators, but about medical interpreters. I suppose the answer lies in the quotation that you find in Centrum, which describes the process itself and can be encapsulated in the following manner, which is listening, which is processing of the original discourse, then providing the target language with certain operation, linguistic operation, decoding information, bringing certain notions together, and of course implying attention span, sharing, decision-making process, all of these being highly significant for the purpose of simultaneous mode. As Fischbach in 1986 stated, medical translation, quote, is the most universal and oldest field of scientific translation, partly obviously due to ubiquity of the human body. Therefore, the same may be applied to medical simultaneous interpreting. which has become, as you can see, an object of study from both perspectives, from medical perspective as such, from scientific generally perspective, and from purely theoretical perspective as well. The issue which is of greatest importance in here is obviously related to responsibility that is implicated, that is involved in the process of simultaneous mode itself. We have to bear in mind the following thing: whereas other non-medical specialties are strongly advised, and interpreters are strongly advised to possess the language, obviously knowledge, and the subject matter knowledge, the problems related to that are not the subject of life and death, unlike in the field of medical discourse. Therefore, precision is of paramount significance in medical interpreting, since, as we obviously know, incorrect, imprecise, erroneous delivery may result in patient's demise, in other words, a patient's death. Right. Okay. Thank you. And therefore we are going to start with a couple of items that were mentioned at the very beginning, the first being terminology. Terminology rather than syntax is of crucial importance for us, and in this case I'd like to focus on two perspectives. The first perspective being a reorientation of terminology, and all the items I'm going to provide you with will be delivered from my conferences when I was working as a simultaneous interpreter, observing certain irregularities, certain problems, certain issues related to medical processing itself. The first, as I said, is related to reorientation of terminology. Dychawica ostrzelowa, previously known as a synonymous word for asthma in English, has been obviously substituted for unknown reason, but this is due to the progress in the language, in the Polish language itself, which is also obvious and present in medical interpreting. Next to reorientation of terminology, changing the terminology, probably might be partly connected with political correctness. There is also the term of substitution due to reorientation in medical progress. As an example, I'd like to indicate Wassermann reaction, which is the antibody test that was used until 1970s. Nowadays known as odczyn Wassermana in Polish, nowadays replaced with some other terms, but still doctors use the Polish term, some of the doctors of the older generation use the term Wassermann reaction to indicate these two recently introduced items. Therefore, for the medical simultaneous interpreter, that might pose additional problem. Shall we proceed? Thank you. The next thing that I would like to focus on is related to lexical precision, or actually lack of precision. I'd like to focus and draw your attention to two items which, even in Polish, sometimes wrongly are considered to be synonymous, which are not. If you focus at hypoxemia and hypoxia, very often, as I said, they are even in English and in Polish used interchangeably. The difference is pretty huge. Because if we have a look at the terminology itself, hypoxemia is related to the arterial oxygen tension, but obviously related to laboratory analysis, whereas hypoxia is obviously related to the tissue level. That kind of lack of consistency in the precision may of course be highly detrimental to medical simultaneous interpreting, where, as you know, there is no time for thinking in a way that we have to deliver the interpreting on the spot. Hypoxia and hypoxemia may or may not occur together. Therefore, sometimes even by some doctors, they are used interchangeably, causing extra problems in the Polish language as such. A little bit different example is related to the notion of synonymity, synonymous constructions, synonymous collocations, and finally synonymous words. In this case, cancer and carcinoma, which in most dictionaries are treated as synonyms, which is not that easy in the Polish language. If we have a look at two examples, squamous cell carcinoma, translated into nowotwór or rak łaskonnabłonkowy, we obviously know that the correct form is rak płaskonaponkowy, sometimes used as the Polish term nowotwór, so as the cancer itself. However, the second use for nowotwór wrzecionowatokomórkowy, which is related to either spindle cell sarcoma or spindle cell carcinoma, here the difference is crucial because the term nowotwór may refer to two items. The first entity being mięsak and the second entity being rak. So these are not synonymous items as such, and this is pretty crucial, especially during simultaneous mode when you actually faced with time pressure, and sometimes there is no time to figure it out and provide the correct term. And then finally we go to British and American English. In this case I'd like to present you with different ways of naming the same drug or the same active substance. I have chosen three active agents. The first, pretty well known in America, in the United Kingdom as well, which is pentobarbital, a short-acting barbiturate. Obviously, in the United States, it's called pentobarbital. In the UK, it's pentobarbital. Every time we deliver the rendition, obviously, we have to take into consideration who the audience are, and that is of prime concern. Being Americans, obviously, the Polish term pentobarbital should be translated into pentobarbital, whereas the audience being British, and that should be pentobarbital. The same is applicable to a more common substance that I'm sure all of you know as paracetamol, which in the United Kingdom being obviously paracetamol, acetaminophen is used, the term is used for United States pharmacopoeia or United States adopted name as such. Some other items are connected with some other drugs that you can see, but I suppose the instance of paracetamol and acetaminophen are the most thought-provoking to realize who the audience are and how a certain register should be matched depending whether it's going to be British or whether it's going to be American English. Now going to discourse. Much has been said about discourse, genre analysis, so I shall not repeat certain items that were provided to you in the room next to. I'd just like to focus on certain items related to doctor-doctor communication, doctor mid-level medical personnel communication, doctor-patient communication, and finally doctor family member or legal guardian communication. From the perspective of frequency, what I have observed myself, the most common commission or the most common aspects that are undertaken by specialists dealing with interpreting are related to two of these items. First of all, doctor-doctor communication, which is the rendition at conferences, medical international conferences, and very often doctor-patient as such. What we forget about, we forget simply about the second notion, which is a doctor versus mid-level medical personnel, which should be obviously taken care of in terms of specialists versus, for instance, nurse or nurses in this case. And now finally moving to false friends. False friends also pregnant with meaning, in fact, in the English language of medicine, and the example being Polish term metronidazole, and its translation, because in fact in the English language we use, in the English language and Polish, we use the term which might appear to be synonymous, but it's not, chemiotherapeutic and chemo or chemotherapeutic agent. In fact, chemo or chemotherapeutic agent is related to oncology and has nothing to do with chemiotherapeutic, which is used in Polish, because in Polish chemiotherapeutic refers to antimicrobial or sometimes wrongly as antibiotic, which are obviously, these type of medications are obviously not related to neoplastic diseases, whereas chemotherapeutic in the English language, of course, is related with neoplastic disease. The same is applicable to conditions and diseases, angina and angina, obviously, right? Angina defined as, simply speaking, tonsillitis due to streptococcal infection, and angina as dusznica bolesna, so absolutely different term, cardiologic term related to oxygen, difficulties of insufficient oxygen supply to the myocardial tissue, in this case obviously representing one of false friends as well. And finally, pretty sensitive issue related to the use of eponyms as such. At the very beginning, the aim of eponymic structures was to serve two purposes. The first being honoring the memory of the inventor, and the second being commemoration for the future generations as such. Unfortunately, also because of political correctness, some issues should be mentioned in here. In the Polish language, English identity related to the medical disease, Haller-Wardenspatz disease, is translated into neurodegeneracyjna choroba związana z zaburzeniami pantotenianów rather than choroba Haller-Wardena-Spatza due to the collaboration of both Haller-Worden and Spatz with the Germans in the 1940s. Therefore, for political reasons, the term choroba Haller-Wordena-Spatza is avoided in the Polish language. If you open up old books, you can find that term. If you open up latest publications, Steckli 2016, 2017, and so on and so forth, students generally are taught about choroba neurodegeneracyjna rather than Haller-Worden-Spatz disease. The same might be applicable to reactive arthritis, and due to the same reasons, obviously, the term reaktywne zapalenie stawów is used in Polish rather than zespół Reitera, not to commemorate the person that was involved in medical tests that were done in concentration camps. The issue, as I said, is very sensitive, but it's also related to well-known diseases such as Crohn's disease, obviously known in Poland as choroba Leśniowskiego-Krona, to commemorate Polish scientists who, by the way, first described the disease, and later on it was developed by Crohn in France. However, outside Poland, the term Leśniowski Crohn disease is in fact not used at all, because the world is of the opinion that that was Crohn who first made it famous, and in fact it is true. The thing is that it was Leśniowski that started the research, but it was continued by Crohn. Therefore, the whole glory went upon Crohn as such. If you have a look at synonymous constructions, Crohn's colitis, Leśniowski very rarely, Crohn's syndrome. Generally, in American literature, you find either Crohn colitis or Crohn syndrome. And last but not least, erythrocyte sedimentation rate, known to everybody, I'm sure, as opad biernackiego, which is OB. Obviously, in Polish, odczyn biernackiego, opad biernackiego, of course, due to our Polish scientist Biernacki, is not used as such abroad. The term Western sedimentation rate is used. Mind you, all these items must be well known by the simultaneous medical interpreter, not to make certain mistakes, because try to imagine the situation when odczyn Biernackiego is translated as Biernacki reaction, where nobody knows what we are talking about, then the subject matter is simply lost as such. I'm a little pressed for time, so I'll try to make it a little bit quicker. And then we move to problems related with equivalence. And equivalence understood on different levels. As such, I would like you to pay attention to the three aspects that I found myself challenging doing medical simultaneous interpreting. The first, the difference between apteka and punkt apteczny, which are obviously completely different notions in the English language. Pharmacy is apteka, which is obviously known to everybody, but punkt apteczny, interestingly, as given in the Act of the Pharmaceutical Law Act as such, that is the point providing medical products, however, except for psychotropic or narcotic agents. It does not have the English equivalent. I can assure you, I spent a couple of days trying to find one, and unfortunately with no results as such. If I'm going to find one, or if any of you is able to provide me, I'll be very grateful to be given. Używki, this is another problem. Używki meaning what? Kawa, herbata, narkotyki, whatever. So boosters, stimulants, drugs, depending on the context, they do not have one synonymous relation in terms of one-to-one equivalence. And then finally, Rzecznik Odpowiedzialności Zawodowej Lekarzy, the term that has been created by the Polish state. Pretty challenging. Of course, if you follow, you find the Polish word-for-word translation, screener for professional liability. But before this conference, in fact, I asked 6 native speakers about the term, none of whom knew what it refers to. So then, in this case, we should rather probably describe it or provide in a descriptive way rather than word for word, which is, as I said, due to time pressure, extremely challenging as such. And finally, abbreviations, and this is the whole plethora. Maybe I'll just briefly talk about it. Shortened forms of phrases. The English language generally, for the time being, provides, or the greatest dictionaries provide 40,000 abbreviations that I use, which is just the whole plethora of them. Abbreviations can be observed from different perspectives. First of all, within different specialties. So ESLD might be either end-stage liver disease or end-stage lung disease. Mind you, sometimes doctors providing speeches, lectures during simultaneous mode forget that what is obvious to them does not necessarily have to be obvious to, first of all, to the interpreter, and second of all, to the audience as such. Later, we focus on abbreviations within the same medical specialty. This case I've taken from a psychiatric conference when I was doing the medical interpreting. SAD, seasonal affective disorder, schizoaffective disorder, social anxiety disorder, completely different items. Still going for the same abbreviation. The physician that was providing the lecture said, quote, "The patient was diagnosed with SAD." So try to provide the interpreting what SAD stands for if no context as such is given. And then to make matters even worse, we move to abbreviations across specialty. RSS, Rett syndrome related with neurology. Ray syndrome related to hepatology. Raynaud syndrome related to rheumatology. And rumination syndrome related to gastroenterology. Try to focus on providing the correct interpreting when the speaker says the patient has been diagnosed with RS. Then you're at a loss for words. And finally, to illustrate something from the Polish brand, OZW, ostre zespoły wieńcowe. Pacjent z OZW został przyjęty na oddział. Obviously, OZW functions only in the Polish language, which is the equivalent of the English acute coronary syndromes. Under time pressure, under certain conditions, under the pressure of certain conditions, the medical simultaneous interpreter has to be aware of certain, first of all, abbreviations and of certain constraints and limitations due to that process. And finally, conclusions to make the whole speech short. Successful medical simultaneous interpreting depends on a plethora of different items, precision, terminology, equivalence, differences between Polish and English, and finally medical synonymity being some of them. The goal, however, is achieved only when the process of interpreting is performed by the professional interpreter with the subject knowledge and obviously native-like command of the English language and Polish language and some other languages that we face. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. much. And now we have just 5 minutes for questions.
Sorry.
But it was so interesting. I wanted to listen to the end. Yes. Any questions? Please.
In fact, it was a great. I was just first interpreter.
Oh,
The medical translation is not but this is. Yeah, it's a great lecture. In fact, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think acronyms are abbreviation and nightmare. I think it should be a therapy for simultaneous interpreters, medical, just anti-acronym pills or something.
afterwards.
Yeah. But how do you cope with this? Because under time pressure, and some of the acronyms are very universal ones. Right?
Universal like CT, MRI, and so on.
Yes,
That's
both in
obvious.
English and both in Polish, right? So they are widely known to Polish doctors, right? But when it comes to the more specific ones, right? Let's take RVOT, right ventricular obstruction, for example, dynamic. When you have to say dynamic RVOT obstruction, I have never met any cardiologist saying it with the whole body, but with acronym. But in Polish, it makes, 7 or 8 words, right? Dynamiczna niedrożność drogi odpływu z prawej komory.
Yeah.
Okay. And how do you go with this? Because you can use, or you have to, or you must use the acronym because of the time pressure. And then you get a very negative feedback from the audience. From the people, for example, who are not cardiologists, but their specialty is related to cardiology, but they are not so deep in the field, right? And then there is you have to take a risk, right? Just to save time and keep with time and use the English acronym, and then you have to explain yourself afterwards, right? And get a negative feedback, and this negative feedback goes behind you, right? Something like this, and it's ridiculous in my opinion, and it's really difficult, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the interesting question indeed. The answer will be simpler than you think. Okay, I hope it works. Yeah. All the mistakes, all the problems that I gave here were taken from my medical interpretation and interpreting. And in fact, a couple of times, I'll be honest with you, at certain times, obviously you make certain mistakes. Then you have like autocorrection. But the problem is that sometimes it's absolutely impossible to predict or even to know all of them. Therefore, now I have the rule. I'm not quite sure whether it's very professional, but it's very practical. I always ask physicians not to use abbreviations for the sake of clarity, for the sake of perception, for the sake of avoiding mistakes. Put it that way. Some of them follow the procedure, some of them not. But I'll try to do my best. Sometimes I, being just a human being, also make mistakes. But I try to discourage them from using acronyms, abbreviations, and so on. Even in Polish, this is interesting. Just to make a long story short, even in Polish, what is known cardiology, in fact, is the medical in the Polish language is the medical field with the greatest number of abbreviations. Generally, it is said that cardiology itself has more than 3,000 abbreviations in the Polish language. Can't even imagine that. This is absolutely beyond comprehension for a standard ordinary person to learn. So I'll put it that way. I ask to avoid. That was practical on the basis of my mistakes, but that's the way it was. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are very short in time, so the next guest will be from Russia. Mrs. Roshkova, yes, from Samara State Medical University. Sorry, I made a mistake. The names are changed. The name is Eva from University of Warmia and Mazuri in Poznań.
systematic, and it sort of builds on the research presented by our plenary speaker and also relates to the presentation provided by my previous colleague. So synonyms in medical terminology challenge or confusion for inexperienced translators, so I basically address very simple issues, sort of focusing on student training perhaps. So a bit of history that was already provided so very quickly. Contemporary medical English has been diachronically influenced by several languages: Greek, Latin, Latinized Greek, French, and Arabic, amongst others. This cross-influence is associated with the historical context in which medicine and its language developed. The oldest medical texts were written in Greek, then Celsus, already mentioned, produced an overview of medical knowledge in his De Medicina in Latin, in which he imported, borrowed directly, Latinized and translated Greek words, thus creating a mixture of Greek and Latin for describing medical conditions. In the Middle Ages, Arabic became another source of medical vocabulary, and later, most medical texts were written in Latin, and medical language remained a mixture of Greek and Latin terms with Arabic and French borrowings. The 19th century witnessed the rapid development of national medical languages due to new discoveries and inventions, but an even more excessive development occurred in the 20th century when advancement in diagnostic measures and equipment necessitated the introduction of new terms to name both clinical conditions and devices to diagnose them. Thus, medical English now is a combination of standard English and medical terms, and these medical terms include Latin and Latin-derived words for anatomical terms, Greek-based ones for clinical conditions, occasional Latin clinical terms and Greek anatomical terms in Latinized forms, borrowings from French, words of Germanic origin, modern neologisms, often based on anthroponyms and acronyms. All of these was already mentioned, so I'm going through that quickly. Words coined with productive suffixes and prefixes of foreign origins, usually Greek, Greek-Latin hybrids, English words that are translations of internationally used Greek or Latin terms. And so this very complex line of development has resulted in the appearance of synonyms that may be the source of complication when translating medical texts from national languages into English, or perhaps we should now say international English, because we can no longer really talk about British English, American English, although, as you said, there are differences, but usually we do talk about international English now. So from a translational perspective, synonyms can pose dilemmas for several reasons. Depending on their type, synonyms can have different stylistic values, and the translator needs to assess their validity in specific text types and for specific receivers. Synonyms can also have quite similar stylistic values and can be used interchangeably. And this often leads to uncertainty as to which expression should be used and why. Additionally, translating for clients who know medical English, as is often the case now, as regards medical doctors who need to publish in international journals, the translator may be faced with criticism relating or resulting from clients' personal preferences. Often, bilingual dictionaries and lexicons of medical terminology don't provide information concerning frequency of use, stylistic value, and context for use. They merely list equivalents for the source word. So this complicates our situation even more, especially the situation of a novice, because research is necessary to assess the applicability of a given synonymous equivalent in a particular context. So synonyms of analogous stylistic value. They often involve words that have been adopted by English a long time ago, and their non-English origin is no longer evident for common users and non-native translators in particular. In the case of such synonyms, the selection of a particular word can be the personal preference of the translator. For instance, if we have choroba współistniejąca in Polish, we can translate it as coexisting disease, concomitant disease, concurrent disease, and all these adjectives are etymologically Latin-based. The definition of each English phrase is analogous. It refers to the presence of one or more additional diseases. The choice of the term is then not dictated by semantic considerations, and the stylistic value is also irrelevant. as all of these terms appear in medical discourse of the same register, with perhaps coexisting being the least jargon-like. The selection of the equivalent is done usually the translator's arbitrary decision, which may lead to a conflict with the client who knows medical English, and he may have a preference for a different word, which was actually my personal experience. The medical doctor questioned the quality of translation based on the choice of concurrent instead of coexisting. In such situation, we deal with the translator's ethics, I would say, and skill in relationship building with the client. The translator may accept the version suggested by the client, yet the translator should not compromise his or her professional position by admitting to having committed a mistake, since the choice of a synonym of analogous stylistic value is by no means a translation error. So the definition of a more jargon-like synonym that would normally be used in the most professional context, comorbidity, justifies the employment of any of the mentioned adjectives, and quote, in medicine, comorbidity is the presence of one or more additional diseases or disorders co-occurring, that is, with, concomitant, concurrent with a primary disease or disorder. The additional disorder may be a behavioral or mental disorder. Another synonymous adjective here would be co-occurring, although it covers the same semantic field as the others. It collocates with disorders rather than disease. So the phrase co-occurring disorders is most often used in psychology and psychiatry to refer to behavioral and mental disorders. Thus, in this case, the translator needs to be more discriminate and should not treat the phrase co-occurring disorder as a synonym of coexisting disease, because of the specificity of medical fields involved. Now, synonyms of analogous or similar stylistic value, which are subjectively perceived as different. They cause the most confusion, I would say. They generally concern words which are derived from different languages, for instance, from Latin insufficiency and French failure, Greek cardia and Germanic heart, Greek nephros, Latin rang, and Old English kidney. They form compounds that name diseases, and confusion stems from the fact that the translator finds various names referring to the same disease and is uncertain, and I'm talking about inexperienced translators, as to which name to use. So when we have niewydolność, failure or insufficiency. In cardiology, heart failure or cardiac insufficiency. Myocardial failure or myocardial insufficiency. Coronary failure or coronary insufficiency. Congestive heart failure, but not necessarily congestive cardiac insufficiency. In nephrology, when we talk about niewydolność nerek, renal failure, renal insufficiency, kidney failure, but not necessarily kidney insufficiency. In gastroenterology, niewydolność wątroby, liver failure, or hepatic insufficiency. We may sort of assume that non-Latin and non-Greek words more readily collocate with other non-Latin or non-Greek words, but this is not an absolute rule. All these forms are used in medical texts targeted at specialists or medical academic papers. Their stylistic value is similar, yet subjectively, words of Latin or Greek origin are perceived as of more professional register than the ones derived from German, French, or Old English. Hence, translators may be inclined to select equivalents from the first group, so Latin Greek, when dealing with professional texts, renal rather than kidney failure. But this simplistic division into more professional and slightly less professional, yet still specialist jargon, is very reductive. Both Latin, Greek, and Germanic, French, English derived terms appear in academic papers and can be found in the International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, already mentioned, ICD, the standard diagnostic tool for epidemiology, heart management and clinical, health management and clinical purposes. For the translator of medical text, the ICD classification of diseases may serve as a useful guide when one is not certain as to which synonymous phrase to select. The 2016 version includes words such as heart, myocardial failure, and insufficiency, as you can see here, chronic ischemic heart disease, but silent myocardial ischemia. Thus, when in doubt, the translator can consult the English version of the ICD, but the real challenge is that with the rapid development of diagnostic measures, different names of the same diseases have appeared and function in medical discourse. The translator needs to be aware of that and be able to relate the name of the disease in a given source text to the term that is currently in use. ICD provides a diachronic perspective of the development of medical terminology, with its revised versions published more or less periodically every 10 years in the past. For instance, in the 1990s, the commonly used name was asymptomatic cardiac ischemia, which in the 10th revised version of ICD was named silent myocardial ischemia. The two terms stem from different motivations underlying the naming process. In asymptomatic cardiac ischemia, the absence of symptoms was emphasized, whereas in the case of silent myocardial ischemia, probably a more specific term appears myocardial, more specific term appears myocardial as relating specifically to the muscular tissue of the heart, and this silent refers to the notion that the disease does not make the person involved realize that he actually has developed it. The ICD can be a point of reference for the diachronic changes in terminology and allow the translator to select a more up-to-date version of two synonymic names found in lexicons and other sources. The language of medicine evolves, and the ICD may help the translator manage his terminological database. To be professionally successful, the translator needs to follow the evolution occurring in medicine and medical terminology. For instance, we have here a number of options, right? Niewydolność nerek, przewlekła niewydolność nerek, schyłkowa postać przewlekłej niewydolności nerek, published terms could potentially be translated as renal or kidney insufficiency, failure, or disease. Chronic renal or kidney insufficiency, failure, or disease. End stage or final stage, renal kidney insufficiency, failure, disease. The word that you liked with this plethora of possibilities, the inexperienced translator may feel at a loss because semantically there is no difference between these synonyms. So the 2003 version of ICD provides the following classification: renal failure, chronic renal failure, end stage renal disease. So this classification is very consistent in using the Latin-based name of the organ, yet depending on the clinical condition, either failure or disease is employed. In this period, most academic papers would use that terminology with the abbreviation ESRD frequently found. The 2010 version of ICD revises the names and introduces a new, more specific classification: renal failure, chronic kidney disease, and then chronic kidney disease stage 5, including end-stage kidney disease. So the naming changed, and that was reflected in scholarly papers, where one would find the abbreviation CKD with the appropriate stage most often. This classification also appears in the latest 2016 version, and so presently the translator should rather select CKD. ICD can solve the translator's dilemmas more authoritatively than conducting research, which may not be conclusive and is quite time-consuming. Different sources often provide two synonymic names. This is not very helpful in making an informed decision as to which synonymous term to select. As you can see here, we've got all sorts of, two versions provided by the same source. So chronic kidney disease, also known as chronic renal disease. End-stage kidney or renal disease. What causes end-stage kidney disease? Kidney failure, also called end-stage renal disease. So the translator simply may not feel sure as to which term he or she should use. The research may also leave the translator confused as to the preference for a given term in the US or in the UK. Should we use CKD in the UK because this is the preferred version or not? So referring to the standardized up-to-date version of ICD proves to be a reliable source of information and can become the translator's guide when synonymic expressions are of similar frequency and stylistic value. But there is always a but. It should be remembered that medicine is one of the fastest developing fields, and terminology may change even faster than the updated versions of ICD. This can be seen in the new name for acute renal failure. According to the 2016 version of the ICD, some nephrologists tend to employ a different name now, acute kidney injury. Acute kidney injury refers to an abrupt decrease in kidney function. The term AKI has largely replaced acute renal failure. This quotation is taken from a paper written in 2015, but a similar terminological change was suggested even earlier. Acute kidney injury, formerly called acute renal failure, is commonly defined as an abrupt decline in renal function. Thus, the translator must not treat ICD as his only source of information, but needs to follow the most current literature on the subject to be able to discriminately employ synonymous terms. Now, synonyms of different stylistic value. This is the relatively easiest group from a translational point of view, because usually we've got words which are translated by means of syntagmatic translation or descriptive equivalents. Words from Greek or Latin terms are translated into English and other national languages. In modern languages, usually Greek or Latin-based terms function side by side with the native versions or versions. More than one may exist. Though semantically analogous, such terms differ in their stylistic values and can be employed in different types of texts and for different audiences. The Greek-Latin-derived terms are typical of very specialist jargon and would appear in diagnosis, patients' records and history, medical manuals describing diagnosis, treatment, management, prognosis of disorders, targeted as specialists and in medical journals publishing original papers, case reports, overview articles. Native equivalents are of a less specialist register and appear in medical texts intended for non-specialist recipients, patients, common readers interested in a given subject. So we've got here descriptive equivalents, acholuria or absence of bile pigments from urine, echolia or suppressed bile excretion. We've got syntagmatically translated equivalents, hematopoiesis or blood cell production, erythrocyte or red blood cell already mentioned. Okay. So generally, it's very easy to distinguish the stylistic value of expert jargon and layman language. We've got expert, zawał mięśnia sercowego, zawał serca, myocardial infarction or cardiac infarction, and layman, attack serca or heart attack. It may be more problematic to select an equivalent when the number of appropriate terms is different in the source and target languages. If we refer to stylistic scales or scales of difficulty according to Peter Newmark, we can talk about opaquely technical like neoplasm, technical carcinoma, but there are also other terms, lymphoma, etc. And then educated and popular cancer. But in Polish, we would have just opaquely technical, and educated, which would be nowotwór, and popular rak. So the levels of difficulty differ between Polish and English. Of course, we have to remember also that carcinoma, lymphoma, sarcoma would be different than neoplasm, because neoplasm can be both benign and malignant, whereas carcinomas, cancer, and rak would be always malignant, right? So we also have to bear in mind those differences. Now, since the stylistic scales are not always comparable between languages, the translator needs to be flexible and needs to select the equivalent according to a generic tradition in particular cultures. For instance, in English medical journals, one would frequently find less opaque technical terms than in Polish ones, especially when the English term is more popular than its Greek-Latin synonym, and the Polish language lacks the translated version. For instance, we have borelioza. In Polish, we do have the name krętkowica kleszczowa. Have you ever heard? Exactly. In English, we have borreliosis, but it's rarely used. They prefer Lyme disease. So in Polish we would usually use this technical term, borrelioza. In English we would use less technical term. As in the titles of our papers, the emergence of Lyme disease a growing threat to urban populations, Lyme disease and update, and so on and so on. So our clients can be kind of, Polish doctors can be unsure, well, why don't you use borreliosis? I could use borreliosis, but Lyme disease is more popular and it's equally appropriate in academic papers. So I have no time, shortly. Conclusions. So depending on the stylistic value of synonymic medical terms, the translator may face different problems and should be prepared to make different decisions. In case of synonyms of analogous stylistic value, the preference for a particular phrase may be questioned by the client. This will require creating a very positive client-translator relationship based on the recognition of the translator's professionalism and competence. The translator needs to be able to cooperate with such clients and justify his choices, but needs to be also prepared to accept a different solution. I mean, there is nothing wrong with talking to the client about selecting a given term if both can be used interchangeably. Additionally, the translator should suppress the inclination for the introduction of many synonymic terms in one text. Medical terminology, as already mentioned, should be consistent, so it's advisable to employ one term for a given source expression throughout the text rather than a number of synonyms, even if we have a choice. In the case of synonyms perceived as being of different stylistic value, which can be used interchangeably, it's important that the translator follows changes occurring in medical terminology, and unfortunately, we need to constantly update our terminological database to select terms in current use. This requires not only referring to standardized terminology, which is periodically revised, but also following developments in medicine and associated terminology. So unfortunately, we need to read up-to-date literature, which is, as I've said, very time-consuming. And if we talk about synonyms with different stylistic value, this requires from the translator knowledge of preferences for terms of a particular level of difficulty in specific text types and cultures. So the translator may also translate one text for different audiences, and here the translator's scopus will become a decisive factor when selecting either a synonym which is understandable to experts or one which is more commonly used. And again, it will all depend on the text type and our recipients. Thank you very much.
We still have 7 minutes for questions. All questions? Everybody satisfied? I have one more question, but not concerning the synonymy, concerning this presentation. Before leaving to Poland, I printed the program, and there should be 5 papers, and here it seems this is the last one.
Yes, as far as I know, somebody very medically broke her leg and couldn't run, so that's why this is going.
So thank you very much. And if there are no questions, so I finish the session. We have the time.